ended our last discussion by raising the question that how did these towns emerge? As in, what made the medieval India a fertile ground for the emergence of towns? Now, in this lesson, we will try to find out the answers to the questions that we have raised in our previous lesson. Around the 8th century, the Indian subcontinent was dotted with several small towns that probably emerged from large villages. Now, previously, large villages were prevalent. Now, in these large villages, a lot of people used to stay together. But scarcity of resources is a major reason why people migrate from one place to the other. And in search of a better living, in search of livelihood, people now started coming from these large villages and they started forming these small towns. To house a lot of people, we need huge amounts of lands. Because previously when people used to stay in the large villages, they faced scarcity of land, they faced scarcity of resources. And in order to find solution to these problems, they now moved out of those large villages and started forming small towns. Now when people started settling in the small towns, they again required lands to settle in. Now with gaining lands, with procuring lands, people now started settling in these small towns. But one of the most important things that people need when they have to settle somewhere is goods. Because without goods, without access to resources, people can never sustain themselves. Now, who are people who produce goods? There are artisans and craftspersons who produce goods that we require in our everyday lives. Now, consider your own life as an example. To live, you require food. To have the food, you require utensils. To cook that food as well, you need utensils. Now that is something you require every day. Along with that, you require your books, copies, pen, pencils and other stationery materials. You also require a bag in which you will carry your books to your school. So you require a lot of things just in one day, just for your sustenance in one day. And all these things cannot come out of nowhere. These goods aren't dropped from heaven. Because you need people, you need artisans and craftspersons who will make these goods for you. In a similar way, when people started forming these small towns, they required goods. And with the requirement of goods, now increased the need for artisans and craftsmen. These groups of people were required to provide goods and various other resources to the people in these settlements. Now in the small towns that started emerging from 8th century onwards, separate streets were dedicated to different professions of people. And the separate streets were dedicated to artisans like potters, oil pressers, sugar makers, toddy makers, smiths and stone masons. Now all the goods that are produced by these various categories of artisans are required for everyday life. And since these goods are required for everyday life, the need for these artisans also started growing. And as the need for these artisans started growing, these people also had to live somewhere. And for them, separate streets were dedicated. So with this, we have understood that these artisans, these craftsmen produced various kinds of goods that were required by the people. Now suppose a person was living in town A. In town A, the person got potters, oil pressers, sugar makers, stone masons, and these people produced goods for people living in town A. Now consider that town A did not have smiths, toddy makers. So from where will the people living in town A get these products? For this, they have to move to a different town. They have to move to another area from which they can procure these goods. In a similar kind of way, now traders from near and far places came to these towns to buy local articles. So local articles were being produced in these small towns by these artisans. And traders who lived in other towns, traders who lived in other villages, now came to these small towns to procure these local articles, because probably these local articles were not produced, were not made in the places they lived. And for this reason, in order to get those resources, in order to get those products, they had to move from one village or one town to the other. Now when settlers started staying in these small towns, people were also required to look after the administration of these small towns. Because without proper administration, no territorial unit can exist for a long time. And what was done for this purpose? For this purpose, a samanta or a subordinate, and in later times zamindars, built their fortified palaces. Inside or near these towns, samantas or zamindars built their fortified palaces, as you can see it here. Now what was the work of these zamindars and samantas? These zamindars and samantas levied taxes from traders. Now people or traders who came from different towns or different villages in that one town to perform trade, they had to pay taxes. And who regulated these taxes? It were the samantas or zamindars who levied and regulated these taxes from traders and artisans. Because both the traders and artisans participated in the buying and selling of goods. Because traders bought and sold their goods in different towns and villages, and at the same time artisans also bought raw materials with which they made finished products and sold them. And since these groups of people participated in buying and selling of products and goods, they had to pay taxes, and these taxes were regulated by the zamindars or samantas. Now another thing that we have to keep in mind is that inside these towns, inside these small towns, many temples were constructed, and these temples were the nucleus of the settlement. Now the temples were mostly constructed by the kings, the nobility or rich merchants. Now when these temples were built by the wealthy merchants or the kings, these temples then became the center of economic growth and development. And for this purpose, the samantas or the zamindars now donated rights to collect taxes to local temples. That is to say, these local temples were donated or given the right to collect taxes from people. The local temples already got a huge amount of money in the form of donations from the pilgrims, and along with that they also had the right, or rather they were also given the right to take taxes from people. Now all these taxes, these various kinds of arrangements were recorded in inscriptions, because without inscriptions there wouldn't have been a legal document or a legal proof of these taxes. Now consider this example. When your parents go to any bank or any other important office to collect or deposit money, they sign some documents, and they make sure to keep that document safe with themselves as a kind of legal proof of the money they have deposited or collected. Now during these times, that is during the medieval period, this legal proof were the inscriptions. So the inscriptions were the documents, if you may, where these taxes and various other arrangements were inscribed. And these inscriptions were preserved so that disputes could be averted. Now when new towns started emerging, a lot of people started coming to these towns, and this meant that the new towns now led to newer avenues of earning revenue. Because whenever people start coming to a new town and settling there or just visiting it, they will spend some money, some resources to buy and sell goods. And this in turn meant that the new towns were earning revenue. And for the traders or for the various visitors who were coming to the new towns, several sarais were constructed. Now the sarais could be seen in the light of modern day bed and breakfast arrangement. These sarais were places where the visitors or the traders were provided hospitality. In this illustration you can see a sarai where a woman is feeding the horse of a trader or a merchant or a visitor. So this means that the sarais were places that provided hospitality to the traders and visitors. Now two things that you have to keep in mind when you are trying to understand the history of medieval India are that during the medieval period proper transportation wasn't available. That is to say, people did not have buses, trains and aeroplanes to go from one place to another. For this reason, horses were used. And along with that, horses were also used by warriors, because horses were used in the battlefield. And for this reason, horses, the trade of horses became very important in medieval India. And for this purpose, now several horse traders formed their associations. Now what did these associations do? These associations had their headmen, and these headmen negotiated on the behalf of the association members with the warriors who bought horses. So from this you can infer that the buying and selling of horses was also a very important thing during the medieval period. By now we have understood that traders during the medieval period used to travel from one place to another to buy and sell their goods, that is to perform trade. Now there were different kinds of traders, and one such kind of traders were the Banjaras. Now who are Banjaras? Banjaras were nomads who traveled across many kingdoms and forests. The Banjaras used their camels and horses to travel from one place to another. They were nomads. What does that mean? That means that these Banjaras or these nomads did not have a fixed house. They moved from one place to another. They moved from one village to another in order to perform trade. Now when these people were moving from one place to another, they made sure that they formed a kind of association for themselves. And what were these associations known as? These associations were known as guilds. And these guilds were meant to protect the interest of these traders. Now these associations called guilds are something that we can find even in today's world, because various merchant groups form their own guilds to protect their interests, to take care of their requirements. And the beginning or the origin of these guilds could be traced back to medieval India, when the Banjaras or the nomadic traders formed their own guilds. Several guilds emerged in South India from 8th century onwards, because from 8th century we have seen that small towns started emerging, and when small towns started emerging, traders from various places started coming to the small towns to perform trade. And since they started coming to perform trade, they started forming their own associations which were known as guilds. So the time period we are talking here is from 8th century onwards. And in South India, among the various guilds that were formed, the most famous were the Manigramam and the Nanadesi. Now along with that, various communities as a whole also started trading. Now there might have been one community that traded textiles, one community that traded rubber. So various kinds of communities traded their own products. And among the various trading communities that emerged around this time, the most famous were the Chettiars and the Marwari Oswal. And in fact, the Chettiars and the Marwari Oswal then went on to becoming the principal trading groups of the country. So in the Indian subcontinent, the principal trading groups that emerged around this time were the Chettiars and the Marwari Oswal. Now with this, let us now focus on the crafts that were pursued in various towns. Now what do you see on the images here? This is a Banarasi sari. Now a Banarasi sari is made in Benares, that is located in the Indian state of Uttar Pradesh. Now do you think only the women of Benares wear Banarasi sari? You will be wrong if you consider it so, because this Banarasi sari is not worn just by women living in Benares, but women living in the entire Indian subcontinent wear Banarasi sari. In fact, you will be surprised to know that Indian saris are exported to around 135 countries across the world. The number is huge. So Indian saris are popular in not just one territory, in not just one state where it is made, but it is popular across the world. Now this is a Banarasi sari, and here you can see a weaver who is working on a Banarasi sari. But do we remember the people who make these beautiful products? Beautiful products as in a Banarasi sari, or be that another textile piece, or be that a stone sculpture. Do we remember them? But it is imperative on our part to know the history of the craftspersons, to know the history of the artisans who toil so hard to make such perfect goods. So now let us focus on finding out more about the craftspersons, finding out more about the artisans who were working in medieval India. In medieval India, one such group of craftspersons that we could focus on are the craftspersons of Bidar. Bidar is a place that is located in the modern day state of Karnataka. On this map of India, you could locate Bidar. And the craftspersons of Bidar were very famous. What were they famous for? They were famed for their inlay work in copper and silver. They made absolutely beautiful and marvelous inlay work in copper and silver. And this inlay work then came to be known as Bidri ware. And the craftspersons of Bidar came to be known as Bidri. In this image, you can see a beautiful showpiece of Nandi, and it is made purely of silver. Now, if you focus on the artwork that is made here, you could see how intricate it is. It is very beautiful. It takes hours of labor to produce something this perfect, to produce something this fine. And this work was done by the craftspersons of Bidar. Now from here we come to another community of artisans. This community was known as the Panchalas. The Panchalas, or the Vishwakarma community, consisted of goldsmiths, bronzesmiths, blacksmiths, masons and carpenters. So you can see how various kinds of artisans made up this Vishwakarma community. Now let us find out a little more about the Vishwakarma community and how this name Vishwakarma is significant to this community. Before proceeding with our lesson, let me ask you a question. The craftspersons of Bidar were known as Bidri, Panchalas, Chettiyar or Marwari Oswal. Yes, you are right. The craftspersons of Bidar were known as Bidri, and they were famous for their inlay work of silver and copper. Now let's divert a little from our line of discussion to talk about Hindu mythology. We know about God Vishwakarma, who is considered the divine architect. It is regarded that Vishwakarma is the architect of the entire world. And Vishwakarma is the god who had constructed the holy city of Dwarka, where Lord Krishna ruled. Along with that, it is also considered that Lord Vishwakarma built many weapons for the gods. And simultaneously, Lord Vishwakarma, as the divine architect, also made the palace of Indraprastha for the Pandavas. So you can understand how Vishwakarma is considered the divine architect. Now this name Vishwakarma also justifies why that community is called the Vishwakarma community. This is because Vishwakarma is considered the divine architect. The craftspersons and artisans who belonged to the Vishwakarma community have been instrumental in building various temples along with sculptures and other important pieces of architecture, and this reference to Vishwakarma is now justified. We have understood why this community was known as the Vishwakarma community. Around this time in medieval India, several kinds of crafts emerged, because along with the bronzesmiths, coppersmiths, stonesmiths and these kinds of artisans, people also required goods that could not be produced by these craftspersons and artisans alone. And for this reason, various aspects of cloth making like cotton cleaning, spinning and dyeing now emerged as specialized and independent crafts. So we have understood how crafts as an entire process emerged during this period in medieval India, because we have learned that various traders came to these towns that were emerging around the 8th century. With the traders coming in, there was the need for artisans and craftspersons who would produce goods that could be sold by the traders. Now in this lesson we focused on different kinds of craftspersons. We talked about the craftspersons of Bidar who made their inlay work in copper and silver. We also talked about the craftspersons and artisans who belonged to the Vishwakarma community and how they were instrumental in building various temples and other pieces of architectures. Along with that, various aspects of cloth making also became very important, because as many people started staying, as many people started forming these settlements, the requirement and the need for cloths also increased, and so various crafts like cotton cleaning, spinning and dyeing were also given independent status. With this, we come to an end of our lesson on the emergence of towns. We have traced how from the 8th century onwards, people from the larger villages now started settling in smaller towns. And when these people started settling in smaller towns, these smaller towns now became very important in the sense that the smaller towns now required traders, artisans, craftspersons. Now while talking about the emergence of towns, we discussed how the traders performed trade on lands. Now lands were not the only places where trade happened in medieval India. Will you be able to tell me where trade happened mostly during the medieval India? This now brings us to a discussion on the port towns that emerged around this same period in medieval India. While beginning our previous lesson, we pointed out that in medieval India, towns were divided into 3 categories, and these 3 categories were the administrative towns, the temple towns and the port towns. So it is the emergence of port towns and important port towns that we will be focusing on in our subsequent lesson. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. You can also register for free at DeltaStep.com or download the DeltaStep app to learn one-to-one with our amazing teachers, or to get access to all our 5,000 plus amazing videos as per your school syllabus. Master each topic with our adaptive practice technology. Get million+ questions with step-by-step solutions and unlimited mock tests. Get all your doubts resolved instantly. Learn via games and win amazing prizes like PlayStations and iPads. So at DeltaStep, learning is not just fun and easy, it's rewarding too. So register for free now.